next session revolves around the theme of AI in PR, once again, and it's titled Reprogramming PR, AI at the Cutting Edge. Our speakers this morning bring deep expertise, which is at the intersection of PR, tech, and strategy. The discussion will be steered by Jonna Burke. I already heard a cheer for her, the Global Managing Director at AMEC. Please welcome also Chad Latz, Chief Innovation Officer at Burson. And joining them is Tristan Roy, Global President, Integrated Solutions and Delivery at Edelman. Chad has come in from New York, while Tristan is here from Toronto. Over to you, Jonna.
Good morning, everyone, including you late partiers. Mad respect for your capabilities on that, by the way. But you have made the best choice of the day, one of the two best choices of the day. Let me go ahead and modify that. Being here early to join for this conversation, because one of the best things about moderating a panel is that you get to sit with really smart people and talk about what's going on, how they get where they are, and it transforms your way of thinking, but it also gives you so much optimism when you're thinking about your own organization of what's going on. So I have the benefit of having already spent some time with Tristan and Chad, but I'm going to ask them now to kind of give everybody a benchmark of your organizations, kind of where you are, how you started on this journey, and what it looks like for you, and then we'll drill down into some of the other questions specifically around that AI transformation. Let's go ahead and start with you, Chad, if you don't mind.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and what a fantastic event. Thank you to ICCO for putting this on. You know, we began our transformation journey on generative AI a few years ago, but the strategy for AI was something that we laid down back in 2016. So, you know, I think it's sort of befitting we're having this conversation here at this moment now, less than 3 years before the drop of ChatGPT, and for those of us, while we were sleeping, the latest model, of course, released. And I think there's been a lot of key learnings over time. About a year ago, I think the active conversation was, you know, what is it that we think, I mean, just completely in awe of what AI can do. And I think the active conversation now is what should we allow AI to do? And I think one of the things that I've really appreciated about the conversation over the course of the last day and a half is really the equal measure of human impact and technology impact. At our organization, we've instituted a collection of technologies and a program that we refer to as Future Work, something that we began a couple of years ago. We've analyzed 230 different tasks that communicators do on a day-to-day basis, clustered that into subgroups and subtasks, and then looked at how do we do both technology and skill development concurrently to, of course, elevate the work that we're doing as practitioners, but also then guide the transformation of our clients. It's been a pretty powerful journey along the way, lots of learnings to share.
Great, thank you, Chad. Well, first of all, it's lovely to be here in Mumbai, and I'll join Chad in thanking Arun and the entire team at ICCO for inviting me to be here for this important conversation. You know, I think there's a lot of agency leaders in the audience, and so I think before I get into Edelman's specific strategy and approach on this, a couple sort of framing comments is, so one, you know, I think you have to think about this technology as both a general and a generational technology. And the implication of that is ultimately that you also have to think about this as a structural change to the cost basis of your business. This is going to be both a structural OpEx cost and a structural CapEx cost for your business moving forward, meaning it is going to need to be embedded in the core of your operations, both your back office and your front office, and you're going to need to be making regular investments to build sort of accretive differentiation in the marketplace. So I think just sort of framing yourself in that mindset that, you know, the structure of the way that you run your business is fundamentally changing. Then I think, you know, really trying to deal with the amount of change coming at you, it's helpful to sort of think about the structure of an AI-enabled business. And, you know, you can think of it as sort of a layer cake or a stack. And, you know, I'll share a couple of the ways that we've kind of thought about it. So the base layer is really data, right? Data is the fuel, the energy that powers LLMs. Your next level is sort of your technology, your compute, your sort of algorithm layer. That's your cloud, your LLM acquisitions. Then you've got really sort of a workflow and orchestration layer that ultimately then starts to take the data and the technology and guide the way that your teams work. You then have a services layer and you have a human layer. And so one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do is think about each of those layers and think about where you can actually make a difference in your marketplace, where can you differentiate, and where can you make a difference for your clients. And that's instructive in as much as if you think about that technology and compute layer, that's a sort of commodity. So everybody in the market is going to generally be working with the same technology, the same compute, as long as you can procure it. Where you have opportunity to distinguish yourself is, one, on the data layer. And so, for us, we have, I hope everyone knows, a long study of trust, decades-long study of trust, both what you see in the marketplace with the trust barometer, but then very specific work we do with our clients longitudinally on the study of trust, and then large data sets on the study of trust that informs the way that our teams prosecute the work. And so we actually started similarly, before the emergence of generative AI, we started working with early transformer models to train models on our corpus of data with trust. From a workflow perspective, really thinking about almost taking the way that your teams work across capabilities and thinking of it as a map of a subway, and breaking down the workflows that your teams use to prosecute the work, and then at every stop on that subway map, figuring out, okay, what can be automated, what is work that is empowered by humans, and what stops on the subway map are still just humans. And so really taking a sort of diagnostic, engineering-based approach to thinking about the way that people do the work. And so we've been going, team by team, capability by capability to sort of understand the work. Doing the same with the way that our client teams work. With human and sort of the services layer, on services, what I just talked to is sort of speaking to the way that we're transforming the current business. And then the real exciting part of where you get into sort of the services layer is thinking about the business that we can create and new ways to help clients. And certainly trust informs a big part of that, and I think we're going to get into that a little more in the conversation. The last thing I'll say on the human layer, and it's encouraging to hear the conversation about the human in all of this. We were having this conversation yesterday. I think in an environment of, in an AI-enabled, an AI-powered agency environment, where, I just spoke to those places where you can have differentiation in the stack. Actually having excellent humans on the front line of your client relationships becomes more important than ever. Because ultimately, everybody's going to be working with large language models. Everybody's going to have automated workflows, but it's the quality of the people that pick up the phone to engage and advise with the client that ultimately is going to be the highest level of potential differentiation you can deliver in your marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I just maybe build on something you said, Tristan. I think that there's a natural tendency to gravitate towards faster, better. There's a part of the value proposition that I think organizations are starting to expect and are certainly forcing upon agencies, right? And I think we've all heard it, right? CEO mandate comes down, drive AI into every corner of the business, right? And I think the easiest place to get to is in a way sort of that commoditized layer of the availability of the technology. And as you're sort of talking about moving through the different facets of the implementation of the technology into the business, oftentimes I think the question probably that should be asked first is, what's the problem that we're trying to solve either for the business or for our people? and how do we then appropriately apply the technology there, particularly as, some of what we're seeing in the models. The big providers will chase each other around the table. We see it like every day, like low-grade anxiety. You wake up in the morning, new model drops, this, that, and the other thing. Big technology companies are dropping products that are disintermediating our entire industry. All of these things are happening. But then there's this idea of how do we help guide both organizations and our organizations and clients through that transformation. And I think there's a really big problem in that right now. So for those of us who are in the room that have been, in the industry for a while, there's a tendency, I think, for practitioners and technologists to say, oh, you know what, we've been here before. Yeah, remember what happened with social media, right? There's this world where, of course, now there's peer-to-peer publishing and peer-to-peer influence, social commerce, right? A single technology disrupts a system in a way. And I think, this idea of the disintermediation of everything, where sort of every facet of our business is sort of facing a moment of change, is really sort of something that we actually have to sit up and really pay very, very close attention to. So this isn't really about rethinking the way that we do work as communicators with the augmentation of a single tool, right? I used to win the spelling bee in the 5th grade. Now I couldn't spell to save my life.
Congratulations.
Right? Yeah, right? I mean, you sort of think about how technology has sort of stripped away the necessity for certain skill. And some people say, well, this is just another example of this, everybody will have something with the IQ of 155 in their pocket, right? But I think, what we're experiencing here is fundamentally way more disruptive.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, AI is not your father's fax machine is basically the takeaway that everybody needs to understand, that while it is tech-based, there's so much more to it. And I think even in our conversation, it's understanding when organizations are already connected to the value of what they're doing, it's much easier to deconstruct those needs and those activities that are going on within their organization that are delivering that value. So let's talk a little bit about, the process of upskilling the teams, and creating that delineation between, okay, what are we doing today? Yes, but what does the future look like? So how are we upskilling and kind of vetting the teams that we have for what's going to be needed, but also keeping in mind, you guys both have comms as your background, and so it makes that leadership role in safe hands. You're looking at the ethics of it, but also where does creativity lie? Like, what consideration is that in that process as you're looking at those teams, what they're doing and what their future roles are going to be like? Because that's where the business implications, right, of recruiting, of retention, of all of those really hard costs for your organization, and then what you can deliver to the clients against that margin are going to look like. So heavy is the head that wears the crown, you two. How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, happy to start. I think we have a number of key learnings. When you implement a technology, I think there's a tendency to say there's a new technology solution. We need to train people up on how to use those features, right? And I think you start to sort of see, well, maybe there's an early adoption curve of people who are more inclined to be able to do that kind of work. And when you're developing solutions that are fit for purpose for different types of practices and practitioners, you start to kind of unlock real insights. We all talk about having a struggle for the availability of time, and one of the things that we realized pretty quickly was the idea of upskilling an organization, expecting that people are going to sit through an hour-long training on how to use generative AI in their work. Was a bit of a fool's errand. I think that there are people that can dedicate that kind of attention. So for us, a big opportunity was to unlock. We call them 5-minute productivity hacks. 5 minutes to do a fundamental task that we do as communicators that will absolutely change the way we work. And so it started off by training up on those little abilities to instantaneously introduce AI into your daily workflow. And then of course, you start to break down series of tasks, right? And you're like, okay, well, these types of practitioners operate in a particular way. They go through a series of tasks, and we're going to think about how AI is implemented at each step in the task. But I think one of the things that we're starting to realize quite quickly is that the idea of implementing AI in a collection of agents in support of the work that we do whether that's sort of how we sort of add agents into our overall approach to staffing and service or otherwise, is that it actually changes the nature of workflow altogether. You know, you don't actually have to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. It becomes a lot more fluid. There's a lot more silo busting that happens inside of organizations because we can bring, you know, a practitioner in one area can bring an idea much further down the road and sort of bridge the gap that we thought maybe historically existed inside of organizations. You've got your creatives and your strategists and your account people. And so what we're seeing here is that people are getting way closer in the delivery of the work with the technology as a facilitator of that, and that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more, Chad, with the point around the driving horizontality, the silo busting. It really is sort of connecting our teams and, you know, sort of obvious adjacencies, but also sort of unexpected adjacencies. And, you know, in a world where obviously geopolitics is bringing sort of policy and commerce much closer together, those adjacencies and those intersections are quite important and quite powerful. You know, I think, you know, on the question of kind of culture and upskilling, I don't think there's, you know, I think it has to be a scaffolding of solutions in the organization that includes, you know, things like we've certainly made it, it's a compliance issue at Edelman. So, you know, given the risks that are inherent in the technology, particularly relative to client use and client data, you know, it's a part of our annual compliance program that people sort of take a basic level of training and understand their both opportunities but obligations to the firm and our clients with the technology. We've also made it a part of KPIs, and so you know, it's all the way up to Richard, and you know, it's a part of our performance culture at this point. But then you know, I think going beyond, I guess what you would say would be more the stick, you know, finding the carrots, which is ultimately, you know, once you're sort of creating the conditions in which people feel safe to responsibly engage with the technology, you know, how do you find those moments of, you know, the 5-minute productivity hacks, or, you know, we do something called Friday AI, which just is sort of kind of almost like a riotous, almost sort of like party-like atmosphere where we just have some of our folks that are both kind of mad scientist types that are just playing with the technology, as well as some of the folks that have really unlocked some real kind of productivity hacks coming, and, you know, there's music playing, and it's just a sort of show up, you know, very informal environment where people kind of feel comfortable to come and ask questions and see what's being done with the tech. I mean, you know, I think the last thing I'll say is, you know, and not to repeat anything that Chad said, because I think we're doing a lot of what you said as well, but, you know, underlining the point that, you know, I think a lot of leadership is modeling behavior, and so I can't underscore the importance of the leadership of the company, sort of walking the walk, not just talking the talk, and, you know, we've certainly seen an impact in, you know, from our executive leadership team down to, you know, sort of our country leaders. You know, this isn't just a thing that's for the junior teams. And, you know, we're expected to show how we're using AI in our work and how we're driving our teams to think differently about workflows and about intersectionality. And so, you know, I think there's not a one-size-fits-all or sort of single solution to sort of attacking the problem of, or the opportunity of upskilling and sort of transformation. I think you have to think of it at multiple levels, and carrot and stick, and go from there.
Yeah, I actually really love that. I think, you know, it has to be implemented and felt in all parts of the organization. I think for us, you know, a big unlock, I think a lot of anxiety that comes by practitioners in the world of AI is this notion of, like, you know, well, what will the AI do to me, right? It's that uncertainty in terms of how it's going to impact the work that I do, the thing that I've sort of maybe spent my career training on. And for us, a big unlock. I think we're fortunate to have incredible investment at WPP, hundreds of millions of dollars of every year in AI technologies. People don't have to make a choice of what model they use. They're all available to our people. And so, a big unlock was to sort of say, okay, how do you bring it into the business, into the culture, and at every level? Giving our people the ability to actually build agents on their own was a massive, massive unlock, because this all of a sudden wasn't a matter of like, well, you need to use this technology because we need to hit these efficiency targets. The idea was you need to use this technology that we're giving to you to use in ways that inspire your way of working, that will help you be more effective and productive in the way that you see fit. And for us, we saw adoption just absolutely at that moment explode. And the happiest moment of almost every day is not what we're doing centrally in the innovation function, but it's having somebody out in the business come to us or come to me and say, I want to show you this moment where we've sort of hooked all of these agents together in an orchestration fashion to do something actually maybe somebody on the core team hadn't even envisioned. And then how do you elevate that across the rest of the business for utility and, of course, for our clients? So, I think there are ways to think about the impact of the technology and how it's felt in different parts of the organization. And I would challenge, maybe something that we heard yesterday, that, it has to start at the top with executives building their collection of agents. I think it's absolutely essential that leaders understand the impact of technology and what that will do to their organizations, to their clients' organizations, but I actually think it has to happen really sort of at all points of the organization simultaneously.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love the point on agents. I mean, we've seen similarly. I've lost count of how many thousands of agents that our teams have built, and I'm sure in an organization like Burson, it's the same. And we have a central team of about 60 people that are product managers, data scientists, engineers that are really sort of the speedboat helping drive transformation into the organization. And they go in the sort of GPT library and surface the ones that are really starting to drive usage and drive adoption. But there's both a centralized and a decentralized element to the adoption, which I think is also pretty important. Having a notion of a centralized innovation function that can really push, but also having a decentralized approach, and again, creating the conditions for people to sort of responsibly and safely engage with the technology, build GPTs. It's like, what a time to be alive, right?
It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it's so empowering. I mean, I love that example because there's the fragility of the human condition, of the unknown and of change. We're not great at it. Even, change makers, not great at it. And so we definitely see this shift instead of the what's in it for me to this balance of what about me, right? Because there is that reality of what is on the other side of that, especially when you're talking about building agents and kind of that digital twin effect of, what their work is. And if it can easily be replaced by the LLM and the programming, it's scary. So I'm going to ask you one quick question, and then I'm going to leave the last couple of questions to the audience. I heard you from yesterday, thank you. But really around the big challenge, one of the big challenges in the agency model is around, RFPs and hourly work and what that looks like. Does AI get us closer to creating that balance? And I know, Tristan, I want to start with you because you made the mention of, it's really important to have that human who's answering the phone, who's having those conversations, be the person that can bring all of that together. So does AI get us, is it an accelerant to getting us to that challenge of, the hourly rate and how we can price the work more effectively to make it more meaningful for the client and to really be integrated into their business? Or are we, still kind of modeling against the old model, but trying to use AI to augment that?
I mean, look, I think at least for an organization of our scale, we have to be doing both. We have a core business that we have to sort of be making purpose built and purpose fit for today, and figure out how we understand how that core traditional business is going to transform and change. And then we have I support and represent a community of 2,000 people at Edelman that are non-traditional PR practitioners, they're creatives, they're social media experts, they're engineers, they're production producers. So I think I think you do have to think both ways. Look at your core business, and how do you transform that in a way that's going to allow you to be modern and continue to drive the highest margin out of it, so then you can then fuel the transformation of your business as it's going to be tomorrow. Look, in terms of the general environment, the business model, et cetera, I mean, one, I would say I could not be more excited with the technology because I think I have a real hope that it is going to eventually and ultimately at scale allow us to both prove and improve the value of communications. And yes, I know Barcelona and speaks, that's near and dear to your heart, Jonah. But ultimately the way that we change our commercial model is ultimately by changing the ability to demonstrate the commercial impact of our commercial model. And so, I mean, look, there are lots of really smart people thinking about, the hourly model, the value-based, the performance-based, are we selling products? Are we more service as a software in the future? This flipping of software as a service that has been discussed. And I don't know that I'd place a single bet on any one of the models being it's like a from to. I think ultimately we will still have sort of high advisory, high consultation level engagements that are probably more on an hourly based model. I think more parts of our business will move to whether it's value, performance based, product pricing, et cetera. But it is. I mean, I assume everyone in the room is feeling the pressure of the hourly model. I would also challenge that. I think our hourly model has for a long time supported a fair bit of inefficiency that ultimately has been passed on to our clients. And I don't speak for my agency specifically there. I think that's an industry, a structural problem in our industry. And so, I would have said before generative AI, every year as leaders, we should be saying, how can our teams be 10% more efficient? I think AI is just sort of accentuating the fact that we could and should be more efficient in the way that we deliver work to our clients.
And I guess maybe I'd answer the question in a little bit of a different way. I think at the end of the day, clients come to us with very specific problems that they have to solve, like period, full stop, technology involved or technology not involved. And efficiency and cost is really just sometimes one of those problems. And I think what clients want to hear is that you can bring the best of what innovation and technology can offer to drive the highest value consultancy for my business that helps me at the end of the day achieve those objectives. And I think we sort of started the conversation by talking about there is no sustainable competitive business advantage in implementing generative AI. The business advantage comes from...
It's not a strategy.
It's not a strategy at all. The value comes in how you implement different aspects of AI, how you really elevate and deliver work for clients. And of course, we're similarly evaluating lots of different commercial approaches to that. We have clients that come to us and they say, well, we want a subscription to this AI technology that you've built that will predict the impact of any communications in 8 seconds. Well, that's great. That's a speed thing, right? But it's also something that powers the consultancy and great advice, and you need to have, capability and expertise that clients, I think, are always going to be willing to pay for.
All right, we have time for one question from the audience. No pressure, make it really good.
Mike Klein from Strategic Magazine. You talk a lot about embedding this and injecting this into the culture. But to what extent, aside from just simply pushing this out and making it important from a managerial perspective, what are you guys doing from the perspective of catalyzing peer-to-peer sharing, peer-to-peer training, and also to what extent does internal communication drive this transition as well?
We've sort of implemented a transformation program that is happening in every facet, every part of the matrix of our company. And so as part of that, people are convening and communing around the technology in sort of different cohorts. So I'll give you an example. So you can take our crisis and reputation risk team, and that team, as a matter of their strategic planning, is expected to sort of gather and convene as a team and talk about how they're going to be using the technology to both change their workflows, change the way that they engage with other parts of the organization, as well as ideas on how they can create new value in their work. So an example of a way that our teams are gathering in a sort of capability-based cohort. We're also doing the same with our large client relationships. And so, we'll have teams of several hundred people working on some of our biggest global clients. They too are expected as a cohort to kind of come together and say, okay, how are we working as a team? Not just how are we working as a capability, but how are we working horizontally as a team? And again, we have a central team that sort of stewards them through the process, but ultimately we're empowering them to kind of say, okay, how do we work together? What do our clients expect? What are the rhythms of the habit streams of the work that we do? And how do we come together to sort of make an impact on our client, our day-to-day, our work? So I think it's about both structurally creating some very specific cohorts and that gather people to drive transformation. And then again, certainly, we have forums like Friday AI or other things that, it's more spontaneous, those sort of catalytic moments in those intersections. But again, I think you have to look at your organization, look at how it's matrixed and structured and say, okay, what are the sort of groups in which people work? And then get those groups to really, empower them and take some accountability within their group to change the way that they work.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike. I think at Burson we're tackling it in a variety of different ways. We have communities, AI communities around the world that are sort of looking at it in terms of latest innovation and models and sharing insights in that respect. Our Future Work program is a multifunctional program. It's not just the innovation team and the technology. It's our finance people and HR teams. It's multifaceted in terms of how we implement that into all facets of the organization. And then, of course, it's in the context of different practices and expertise. So, AI isn't something that sits under here. It's an enabling layer in all facets of the business. So when we release a new AI product or technology, Reputation Capital, Decipher, some of the things that you've heard about, it's all about contextualizing that in the work that people do. They get excited about how they see that innovation applied to their clients' business problems.
I think that's a great way to end. Special thanks to our panel. I think while AI is the responsibility of everyone in the organization, these two organizations have a dedicated leader to then create that balance throughout the organization and to do that testing. And after spending some time with them, this is the model. To have someone who is a leader, to have someone who is thoughtful, to have someone who is intentional, to have someone who is driving those efforts in an ethical and in a humane way, right? Keeping in touch with that keeps us unique is really exceptional. So these two fathers who take time away from their next generation to make the generation better for all of us, please join me in a round of applause for them. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.